so much. Thank you so much for being with us here at Prosperity Institute. It is a beautiful morning here in Mayfair, but for the British economy, the hour is late. As many of you know, I am rather fond of quoting John McCain when he said, "Things are always darkest before they're really black." Actually, we at PI also like to say that things will get worse, but then they will certainly get better. Yet, as our special guest today is going to remind us, the first stage of recovery must surely be diagnosis. So we must face the facts. What is the trajectory today that our great country is on? Here at PI, we stand for national prosperity. This rests on the straightforward things that have made our country succeed. They are flourishing families, functioning borders, very low and highly selective migration, low taxes, sovereign democracy. Today, after a generation when the establishments of the West abandoned that ancient wisdom in favour, frankly, of passing fads, that national prosperity is truly at risk. Growth is becoming a thing of the past. And today, we are reminded why prosperity is so fragile. After all, for most of human history, there has been really very little of it. Economic growth has been rare indeed. In the centuries leading to the Industrial Revolution, however, this country created a unique and precious environment that unleashed the greatest period of prosperity growth the world has ever known. Its building blocks included freedom of contract under the rule of law. That's something Marxists renamed capitalism to make it sound nasty, as well as free speech and very small government. We are reminded daily that much of today's political class is busily taking apart this wondrous legacy. As the state expands its reach into our household budgets, our freedom of speech, our freedom of association, our future is at stake. We sometimes also half-joke, that Britain today increasingly feels like the early years of East Germany. Since at least the days of von Hayek, the supporters of free markets have warned that a free society will not long survive the growth of government. But even von Hayek couldn't imagine the sheer strangeness of our times. For example, just like in early East Germany, private companies are still allowed to exist, but increasingly they understand that their job is to support the state and its ideologies. That's why the CEO of a major airline recently asked people to take fewer flights. All for the sake of the pagan weather gods of net zero. A label on Nescafe jars, I was reminded on my kitchen shelf the other day, recently reminded instant coffee drinkers to celebrate gender diversity over breakfast. Freedom begets freedom, control begets control. Today, though, we will hear about a crucial part of the route back to prosperity and to an optimistic nation. Our special guest today is a great friend of the Institute and a supporter of the principles we hold dear. We are delighted to welcome Andrew Griffith MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade. Andrew was Minister of State for the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology from 2023 to 4. He was also Economic and Financial Secretary to the Treasury and has been Conservative MP for lovely Arundel and South Downs since 2019. Bravo, Andrew. We are very grateful to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Radomir, for that kind introduction. It's always a good day when we're quoting Hayek before 10 o'clock in the morning. And it's wonderful for the PI Institute to host us all this morning. Thank you very much for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've come today to speak Because I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist. And maybe in the shadow of this terrible government, that sounds strange. I suppose I'm an adherent to the idea that the darkest hour is actually before dawn's new light. And in politics today, we hear less and less about optimism, just as we hear less and less about prosperity. Politicians love to say that they believe our best and brightest days are ahead of us. Successive prime ministers of this country have stood on the steps of Downing Street and said precisely that. And yet we've seen life in this country get objectively worse. Because for too long, too little has actually changed. But I believe Britain can return to being a world leader in innovation, just as it was at the time of the first industrial revolution. British families can once again be amongst the wealthiest on the planet, with tremendous purchasing power and the greatest life expectancies. We can once again put a Union Jack-shaped dent in the universe. But none of that will happen without radical change. And none of that will happen without the ferocious problem-solving power of private business. So many of you in this room are here, and I suspect the Prosperity Institute only exists because we are optimists. We absolutely believe that things can get better, decline is not inevitable, and that the action of individuals and ideas matter. In evolution, optimism is selected for because it encourages persistence, exploration, and risk-taking, from exploring across unknown oceans to landing on the moon. It's optimists who venture into the unknown with that unknown belief in a better future. I spent 25 years in business where I saw optimism at work every day. The optimism that builds a business, that turns capital into global scale companies, or takes a product from its first customer to millions, or a first hire to tens of thousands of jobs. And we can be optimistic about Britain with good reason. Britain has huge strengths, which even years of this government will not succeed in eradicating. The English language, the rule of law, deep and sophisticated financial markets, a unique mix of the kind of businesses that thrive and will grow globally. 4 of the world's top 10 universities, technology, AI, life sciences, space, advanced manufacturing, creative industries, and our wonderful financial and professional services. Around the world, people still want what we make and even more. They want our skills, our capital, and our ideas. They may not be building railroads with British steel and powered by British coal anymore, but they are building their country's futures with the help of British engineers, architects, technologists, and financiers. In every corner of this country, there are people solving problems through the power of private enterprise, doing things that seemed unimaginable right up to the moment until they weren't. That's the spirit we need to bring to government. Some say Britain is in late-stage capitalism, that we've had all the growth we're ever going to get, and now it's just time to share out and reallocate the pie. Fundamentally wrong. We're living through the most rapid, transformative period of technology change on this planet, when humans walking on the surface of Mars no longer seems impossible but inevitable. When the smartest person you know is an app on your phone that speaks, thinks, reasons, never more than a click away. When disease that once ravaged and decimated nations can be cured in months or a few short years. This country is at the forefront of many of those changes. And there's no reason why we can't capitalize on that. And there's no reason why we should settle for just a few % of GDP growth, rather than a GDP per capita of £100,000. There's no reason why we can't expect to cure Alzheimer's or many cancers in our lifetimes. We live in the most exciting age for human progress ever, and we should set our sights and calibrate accordingly. I'm also optimistic because the problems we face right now are entirely tractable. We're not the only country to struggle with an aging population. We're not the first to experience an extended period of low growth. We're not alone in struggling to retain our best and brightest, to face high housing costs, or to have suffered a wave of low-skilled, culturally challenging immigration. Our friends in Poland suffered years of socialism and are yet now on course to overtake us on GDP per capita. Singapore was once synonymous with mud and malaria, and now it's a beacon of efficient government. And Britain itself, after the failures of the 70s, picked itself up, restored pride and growth in the 80s. When the will is there, it can be done. But any process of change requires being honest about where you start. We're no longer the rich country that many think we are. Measured by GDP per head, IMF statistics show that the UK has tumbled from being ranked around 9th in the world in 1990 to not even being in the top 20 today. The state here consumes about 45% of our national income, up from levels seen in more dynamic economies like the US, where it's 35%, and very different from Singapore's 10%. And under Labour, clearly the state's share of that is only going up. The comparison with other countries that the UK political class loves to make is with the G7. But that is just another way of concealing our own poor performance. With the exception of the United States, the G7 is the club of complacency, not competitiveness. Our energy costs in the United Kingdom are 4 times higher than energy costs in the United States. We are competing in the veterans' race when the real competition is younger, fitter economies who are overtaking us. For 37 years, the Institute for Management Development, the IMD, World Competitiveness Centre, published its flagship World Competitiveness Rankings. The UK, this year, last week, came 29th, just below Belgium, South Korea, and Oman. Belgium. We've declined 11 places. We've declined 11 places since 2021 alone. Ireland, which shares our geography, our language, and much of our history, was 7th. So the next Conservative government will benchmark ourselves against some of the world's most dynamic economies: Singapore, Australia, the UAE, India, Argentina, and Taiwan. We know what doesn't work. We see it every week in this government. The growth they promised is not materialising. The jobs they promised to increase are instead falling. And instead of increasing wealth, they've attacked those who create it, shooing away the golden geese, the entrepreneurs, investors, and the top talent that our country was famed for the world over. Too many of our best and brightest young people, the future wealth creators, are exchanging Docklands for Dubai, Manchester for Miami, or Leeds for Lisbon. But whilst things are undoubtedly getting worse, much worse, under this government, we also have to be honest. Much of this is not new. Over 14 years, Conservatives more than strayed from our purpose. Instead of confronting socialist ideas, we too often appeased them or implemented slightly milder versions. As Kemi said, we talked right but governed left. Instead of slashing the thicket of red tape, we became experts at growing it. We allowed international agreements and the courts to hamstring even the most basic functions of government. Too often, we gave in to the socialist idea that governments can and should solve all of society's ills, that whatever the case, something must be done, that government is the solution, not, as we believe, too often the problem. In my view, Conservatives had no business regulating television adverts for yoghurt or porridge oats. We had no business raising taxes to the highest levels in most people's lifetime. And in my view, Conservatives have no business banning cigarettes for consenting adults or their choice of petrol-powered cars. But above all, we cease to be the party of business. True Conservatives believe in the fusion between ideas and capital. We believe in free markets. And above all, we believe it's private enterprise that creates growth, not government. For too long, we weren't true Conservatives. So I want to be clear today the Conservative Party is under new leadership. And as we develop ideas to help our economy to grow, at the heart will be an approach that unashamedly champions wealth creators and risk takers. We're not going to rush into 1,000 detailed policies. We'll take time to think and, above all, to listen. But what I can give you today is some certainty as to the direction of travel. Unlike in the past, a future Conservative government will actively reverse the damage this government is doing. We won't accept the leftwards ratchet of a socialist government merely followed by a replacement that then maintains the status quo. Under Kemi's leadership, we've already committed to scrapping the family business death tax and the family farm death tax. Today we go further and commit to a policy of dismantling Labour's jobs-killing unemployment rights bill. Far too few are aware of it, but I suspect this particular audience knows all too well. It's 300 pages and 120,000 words of red tape, which nobody asked for, no real business supports, and on which every data point shows will cost billions of pounds and tens of thousands of jobs. On a human scale, the price won't be paid for those in the cosseted public sector or those mostly already in work. It'll be paid by those who are looking for their shot, those seeking the first step on the career ladder, or the slightly different, who could have thrived in a supportive and purposeful workplace, but are now consigned to a lonely life on welfare because taking a chance on them becomes prohibitive. Unemployment has risen every month of this Labour government. We will repeal all of the chapters in the bill which hand enormous power to trade unions to grind our economy to a halt, while removing the checks and balances on which there's been a consensus for decades, including during the whole of the Blair and Brown socialist governments. What does this mean? Well, it means no to shorter notice for strikes, hampering businesses' ability to prepare. No to collective bargaining being forced on a private business on the strength of a request potentially supported by just one employee in 50. It means reversing the trade union right to roam inside private business premises and IT systems, and no swipe to strike electronic industrial action balloting with fewer controls. And it means closing the left-wing Fair Work agency that will pursue lawfare against British businesses even when no employee has raised a complaint. We'll also repeal the parts of the bill that destroy flexible working hours, confer day one rights that prevent employers taking a chance on young people, and ban free speech in pubs, restaurants, and public places. We'll consult and seek guidance in respect of the remainder of the bill, not from trade unions or an endless parade of government lawyers, but from an expert panel of those who create growth in this country. That's why I can announce today, as part of our policy renewal exercise, we are setting up the Backing Business Advisory Board. In a complete inversion of this Labour cabinet, everyone on it will have worked in or set up a business. With their guidance, we will finally wield the scythe against the red tape that holds business back and makes us all poorer. We'll also right another wrong. We should never have jeopardised Britain's growth by attacking wealth creators. Since the coffee houses of London in the 16th century, the UK has always prospered by being where capital meets ideas. Global wealth creators have a choice, but choose to come and reside here. Now those conversations are increasingly happening in Miami, Abu Dhabi, and Milan. It will take a Herculean effort to convince those who fled Britain to return. Confidence and consistency is everything. If Labour do not U-turn as they should, we will all be poorer because of it. And that's why I'm committing, as part of the policy work we're already conducting, Conservatives will draw up a genuinely world-beating offer for wealth creators. Our arts, education, and sports sectors and charities all report to me private worries about the loss of patronage and support. And we know that you don't make the poor richer by making the rich poorer. So we'll not only undo the damage that Labour has done, we'll put forward a plan that makes this country the best in the world to invest in and to build wealth. So to sum up before I take questions, the work to once again make the Conservative Party the party of business starts today. There's no way back for us to government without that. It won't be easy, and it won't be done with sugar rush politics or press releases. Instead, we're going to do the hard work needed to be worthy of your trust. We'll take a relentless and serious-minded focus on how we actually remove the regulations that impede growth and reduce the heavy cost of compliance. How do we make HMRC a partner, not a predator of business and the self-employed? How do we reimagine how we take risk in this country when there's an increasing class risk-averse preventing innovation happening? We'll have to be radical on plans to roll back government. Britain today has more quangos and regulators than unicorn tech companies. We need fewer bodies who see it as their central purpose to say no. Instead of one Department of Efficiency, we'll expect every minister to be their own Avier Millet, wielding the chainsaw against waste with the force that taxpayers rightly expect. Some of these ideas will come from lessons we learned the hard way from our failures in government. Many others from copying the success of other countries around the world. But these policies will be backed up by detailed plans and even a team of potential people ready to show up and deliver them. No more trust me pledges that end up never being put into practice. That can be the difference between a renewed Conservative Party and others. I started today by saying I'm an optimist, but I'm only an optimist because I know we can do this. I know that we can return Britain to prosperity, and I know that we can create a future that is something that excites rather than frightens. We have one chance, ladies and gentlemen, and we are going to take it. Thank you.
Bravo. Lovely work. Marvellous. Well, thank you very much for that talk, Andrew. That lived up to and exceeded our very high expectations. So thank you so much for coming here and coming to talk with us today. For those of you that don't know, my name is Fred de Fossard. I'm Director of Strategy here, and I run what we call the British Prosperity Unit, which oversees our economic and regulatory policy. So hopefully I'm a natural compere for the Shadow Secretary of State for Business today. So I have a few questions that we're going to talk about, and then hopefully we'll find some time to go to the floor, because I'm sure there'll be budding ideas from the audience. One thing that's been on my mind is the difference between business and enterprise. We titled the event this morning, How Enterprise Can Save the British Economy. And I remember from my time in government, some of the most stubborn organisations opposed to a deregulatory agenda were the voice of business, or a particular type. Whether it was business groups, large companies, which we shouldn't name on stage, but there was a sense that they were in favour of basically the status quo, they could afford it. So how might you define the difference between business and enterprise and craft a narrative to show that actually, deregulation is great even if the largest companies in the country don't like it?
As between those two, and I think we broadly understand the spectrum from out-and-out rent seekers, dependent on a continued pipeline of support from the taxpayer at one extreme, not large, but at one extreme. I'm firmly, in my mind, when we think about crafting policy, the vision I have, and I represent a district and a constituency that consists only of small businesses. I think the largest employer I've been able to identify in my very rural part of West Sussex probably has about 100 people. Okay. And so they're not dependent on the government. They're not seeking constant access to government. And they're at the sharp end. One of the campaigns that the Conservative Party is running right now is Save the Local, a pub. There's not a better metaphor, really, for when taxes and regulations interface with the real-world economy and our place, the importance of place as a community, with the local pub. A pretty complex supply chain that takes basic agricultural ingredients and turns them into a product. A fundamentally dependent on people, both long-term staff, but also often people who are just using the opportunity of sometimes their first experience of work. My first experience of work wasn't in a pub, but it was in a baker. You know, getting in, I've made more hot cross buns in my life than I ever want to see. That smell of hot cross bun spice still brings me out in hives. But that's a classic example of the sort of first job where you learn the importance, the self-respect of turning up punctually, being present in the moment, focusing on the task in hand, and the benefit of getting a paycheck and a pay slip at the end of the week, and discovering the joys of income tax for the first time, which is an important learning experience.
Certainly.
So, long answer to your question, but in my mind, it's firmly enterprises. It's people who are taking risk, and right at the front end, without all the legal departments, without the HR, but who are sitting there. The biggest opportunity cost, and this is always missed by impact assessments, which you and I both know are more done in the breach than the observance. But the biggest opportunity cost for a small business is time. Right? And that time, usually unpaid, is the Sunday afternoon that you're doing the VAT return, working out the shift for the following week, trying to work out how you're going to cover someone's going off sick or the time they're on vacation. The opportunity cost of time for an entrepreneur, let alone starting to get into the planning requirements, the licensing, the permitting, dealing with HMRC. So if we can lighten that load for the most enterprising, smallest businesses in the economy, I'm very sure that the tail of the things that we do will benefit big business as well.
Superb. So from smaller businesses to larger businesses, one story that's been grabbing my mind over the last year or so is this mass equal pay claims rampaging through the retail sector, Asda, Next, you name it. I think the various law firms campaigning for them. Should the law be changed to stop these from happening?
Yeah, I think the law is happening in a way. The law we passed the most in Parliament is the law of unintended consequences, right? They're kind of well-meaning when they're done, but every successive government boasts about its king or queen speech having more legislation in it than its predecessor. I think that's an inversion, that's a travesty. You know, one day we need a government that boasts about passing fewer laws than its immediate predecessors, or perhaps repealing some laws entirely. But that seems to me a perfect example of legal adventurism, of the substance of where the law has got to, differing wildly from anything that was said in Parliament at the time by the proponents of, you know, the genuine equal pay principle, that regardless of our chromosomes, if we do exactly the same work, we get exactly the same pay. That's very deviant in things like the next ruling. And if it hasn't been addressed in some way by the courts between now and then the next Conservative government must absolutely remedy that.
Thank you very much. However, these cases have a while to go. Let's hope the higher courts see the light. Slightly beyond economic policy, but highly related to it. This week, the government seems to have ground to halt over its piecemeal plans to trim the welfare bill. Obviously, this has a huge role to play in the wider economy. What do you think they should do to try and revive the British workforce and the labour market? And what is your vision for how welfare policy sits into economic dynamism?
It's that old question about the Irish traveller, you wouldn't start from here. And let's be honest, why are they in a mess on something that could be one of those wonderful consensus reforms where everybody agrees there is a challenge and we all work together equal and commensurate to the scale of that challenge? But why are we here? We're here because the government didn't talk about welfare reform at all for 7 months. It was in a box marked never open until Rachel Reeves had a black hole in her latest 6-monthly budget instalments and suddenly and very tactically decided that welfare reform was one of the ways that was going to be. So the starting point is that is not, whatever you think about the merits, that is not a good way to make policy. It's on the back foot and it's too rushed. From my, you know, if I stay not entirely in my swim lane, but from my perspective, the way you really fundamentally reform welfare is by having a complete renaissance about the number of people in work. And you can only do that with a growing private sector, sustainably growing economy. And we should be hugely ambitious about this. All of the interventions that have been made in recent decades have pushed up the cost of employing people, both the direct financial cost and the attendant red tape. To get an employment tribunal case heard in many parts of the country takes 24 months. Now, again, if you're a big business, that's good work for your HR department. If you're a small business, that is absolutely crippling. If you have 12 employees and you yourself as a proprietor are dealing with endless delays, the potential cost, maintaining somebody on the payroll for that 24-month period for a specious claim at an employment tribunal, and all of the attendant legal fees, that is a proper disaster. I mean, you will put plans to expand on hold. You'll be shy of hiring any new employee while that case is ongoing. Genuinely crippling, and there's a huge backlog. So to me, the work that we need to do to reform people's appetite to employ people, create a more flexible workforce, significantly grow the economy, will, if it is successful, suck in millions of people who are currently unemployed. Just imagine, I mean, capital we know is fungible, it's global, we can attract and do attract capital from anywhere on the planet. Ideas we have in abundance. Right? I think there are more ideas, more concepts. You look at the rate of pace in drug discovery, the rate of change in technology. Ideas are not a rate limiting factor. Actually, when you really come down to it, if you're running a think tank or you're running an enterprise, the rate limiting factor is normally, I need some good people, right? So just either it's raw numbers or it's people with a particular level of capability. 9 million people of working age not in work. I mean, that's a country. That's like discovering a whole country full of people who, if you can get the incentive systems right, are ready to join the workforce, be productive employees, and significantly compound the rate of GDP growth. So that is a huge opportunity. Others can go through the minutiae of, a PIP work assessment. What I want to do for you and with you is create that enterprise economy that creates the opportunities for those millions of people, most of whom do tell us they would like to work if they could find the right environment in which to do so.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think fixing the incentives is vital, and it's a very important way of looking about this, which has been neglected in our political discussion particularly in government bureaucracy. But to add to that, and incentives I think are important in the picture of economic policy, regulation and welfare, where does immigration fit into all of this? It has not provided the economic shot in the arm that its advocates said it would, but the sort of big business lobby groups we talked about a few minutes ago still keep on advocating for it. I've read, submissions by trade associations to budgets and autumn statements, which are supposedly fiscal events, where their biggest desire for a fiscal event is a shortage occupationalist category for a particular type of worker. So is this a circle that cannot be squared? I feel like it must be. Where does immigration fit into this and this question around economic growth and labour market flexibility?
Look, in a world where too many young people, and when we talk about the brain drain or flight, it's not just millionaires. Again, they're a group of people that will look after themselves, but it's still regrettable and very damaging for an economy to lose people who are making a really significant financial contribution, as well as creating clusters like the City of London.
Yeah.
But the tragedy, right, that's an economic, pretty hard-headed spreadsheet-style calculation. The tragedy is young people deciding that they have a better future, a better opportunity. Maybe they won't face the same prohibitive rates of personal tax, which for young people can be really quite 1970s-like.
Yep.
Them leaving our country because they think there are better opportunities elsewhere. One of the I don't go looking for opposition's sake.
Sure.
Right? It's not me, as I say. I'm an optimist. You can't get up in the morning just wanting to criticise. There's some good stuff in the industrial policy, and there's a lot of continuity as well with previous strategies. But to your point, one of the things slightly in the small detail is that if you are one of the priority sectors of the economy, they look to make an exemption from the higher salary requirement on work visas.
Yeah.
That's like nuts, right? I mean, your children, my children want to work in these wonderful sectors: advanced manufacturing, financial services, life sciences. I mean, we should be sucking in all of our wonderful homegrown talent, not trying to tilt opportunities in those sectors because of the voice of big business against those. So I like removing global frictions and there are different elements to the immigration debate based on how much you contribute to society rather than how much you take from it. But we shouldn't be shy about saying we want to maximise the opportunities for the best and brightest people here and make sure that we don't get ourselves in a world where they feel they have to emigrate. Slightly different end of the conversation that it's often about boats and controlling immigration. As I say, the party's doing work on that, changing the threshold, the caps, changing some of the incentives about the fact that if you can put your foot on British soil, your path to citizenship and then being able to chain migrate many of your family and community here does provide, an incentive, a rational economic incentive for the boats to keep coming. That work is being done, be assured, but in my domain, it's how do we make the most of the opportunities, the pull factors, the magnets, if you like, that make people want to be here, because this is the best place for them to live, it's the best country in the world, and it's the place that offers them the most exciting opportunities.
I'm pleased you mentioned brain drain as well, because it's something that we have been talking about. We will be doing a lot of work at this institute on as a great challenge to how do we stop it and reverse it. One thing I think is a part of the potential for greater brain drain is energy policy. It might not seem intuitive initially. It's not like the low taxes you get in the Arabian Gulf, but actually I see it when we speak to businesses who are. Britain is so good at starting businesses. We have an amazing startup culture, but then our British businesses seem to hit quite low ceilings, and then the entrepreneurs themselves start looking away. Energy has reared its head as one of these structural costs. What do you think needs to change? Well,
look, one's tempted to say almost everything, but that doesn't help us move forward. I mean, the main thing is the constant interventions from government of all flavours and often, in many ways, conflicting. I mean, I often say it's a bit like a teenager's bedroom. Pile upon pile of detritus such that you can't see the original colour of the carpet. And that's what we've done to our energy policy. And when you get yourself in a hole, stop digging. Stop conjuring up with yet one other intervention designed to mitigate some of the impacts of your previous failed interventions. So good, diverse international energy markets, an ability to maximise the use of the resources that are under our feet. By all means, support a transition. Don't, in the case of vehicles, don't trip yourself up by trying to mandate in tablets of stone a particular transition path and then introduce enormous financial sanctions if the industry and consumer demand doesn't align in exactly the way you thought. Again, in my business, we transitioned from analog television, wavelengths, those old wooden boxes in the corner, to digital, and then to streaming. And it wasn't that there weren't some role for government, occasionally some frequency planning, some regulations, even getting involved occasionally in some of the infrastructure layer. But the idea that you would successfully predict the shape of a consumer adoption curve with all of the other things going on and with technology never proceeding in a linear fashion, sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, but always impermeable to the idea that someone in Whitehall knows best and that the best way to organise a market is to lay it out in lines and tables on a chart.
Marvellous. In your speech, you referred to hoping to see a Union Jack-shaped dent in the universe. A few days ago, your colleague Robert Jenrick described himself at the England and Now in England conference as an Anglo-futurist. It conjured up similar images to me of Mars covered in Union Jacks and the British Isles teeming with sort of AI-powered robots and factories creating all manner of kind of unimagined prosperity. It's all quite exciting. What is your outlandish vision for the future? Do you know what Anglo-futurism is? Can you imagine?
I'm a techno-optimist.
Very nice.
Very good. If you want to put boxes in people. But look, there was a moment in time when people came from around the world to marvel at our technical innovations. Bridges crossing spans previously uncrossed. Tunnels under the Thames through which you could go on a horse and cart, the most advanced, fastest mode of transport of its day, underneath the River Thames, Victorian engineering achievements. And the world was inspired by those. So I'll give you a much more humble vision than British astronauts running around on Mars enacting colonisation fantasies. A vision of a fully autonomous London underground metro system. We've done the engineering. The Victorians started bequeathing us the hard yards of digging the tunnels. The construction cost of creating a modern urban transport system is about 95% of the entire lifetime costs. We've been gifted that. That's our legacy. Those tunnels are already there. The parallel steel rails already exist. The one thing that our political class refused to countenance, never even debate, even whilst talking about harder technology problems like level 5 full autonomous driving, which by the way is a reality now in about 15 cities around the world, nowhere in the UK, but much closer, much more proximate, much more doable, much cheaper, more affordable, would be fully autonomous, 24/7, driverless passenger trains, driverless tubes within central London. We even have little bits of it which are autonomous. We've got the Docklands Light Railway. And the only thing holding us back is imprisoning our minds and the capture by the trade union body of certainly the Labour Party and some other parties. We could do that. We could do that in a short time frame. Once again, the world could fly to the United Kingdom and our expanded, wonderful Heathrow Airport. They could fly to the United Kingdom to see one of the test cases of the application of technology to urban living. No plans for that. No one's talking about that at all.
Absolutely right. There's quite an exciting vision for Brexit as it can be imagined. It's what I always thought, particularly in the government we both served in a few years ago. On the subject of Brexit, and then I'd like to turn to the floor, if we have a microphone, if possible. The government is committing to sell out regulatory autonomy, sovereignty with its current reset. It is aligning British food and health and sanitary and phytosanitary regulations with the European Union, which I do think will impose greater costs and reduce innovation for British farmers and consumers. But one thing I think which is really potentially damaging is the fact that they have decided to align energy prices for industrial producers and industrial users in this country, which to me seems that it will potentially lock in net zero to Britain. They will essentially say that we will not be able to repeal or water down net zero without Brussels say so. And B, it will then turn Britain into a genuinely captive market for European manufacturers. Will the Conservative Party repeal this reset? How are you going to approach the reset as it lands in Parliament over the next year or so?
The good thing, there's not much good about being in opposition in the face of this government. You know, one feels like a hostage being taken to a destination that you really don't want to go to. But look, you know, as a patriot, it's just that. I hope every day for U-turns that one doesn't seek to make political capital from just because, you know, we all vested in our economy and the success of this nation. But the point I was going to make is the silver lining is both you can have the space to confront some of the hard truths. Energy is absolutely one of those. You know, we've been on the wrong path and need to right that. And you can start to talk about that, things from first principles. When I became a member of Parliament, I'm still a relatively new member of Parliament, I thought we spent a lot of time talking about politics from first principles. But I assure you that never happens in the tea room. It's all about personalities and tribes and process if you're lucky. So now is the moment to reconnect with first principle conservatism, apply that to domains like energy, the leadership that we are now having on net zero, where we are repudiating net zero, the idea of, you know, politicians passing declarative statements without a plan in place. And as part of that, we will need to restructure an energy plan and all of the other domains in which a unthought through commitment to net zero, you know, it includes construction industry, it includes airport transport and vehicular transport and lots of different parts of the economy are touched by energy and by this net zero agenda.
Absolutely.
Not a full answer to your question, to be clear. It's sort of stepping back and saying, look, I'm not going to give you the detailed policy. I regret the fact, for example, that the government confirmed earlier this week that they are proceeding with a carbon border adjustment mechanism. You can call it whatever you want, it is a tariff, and whilst they may relieve some small selected favoured industries, that is going to put up the supply chain costs for most small, medium-sized businesses. It's going to put up the end cost of products to consumers, and that is regrettable. It is no use performatively people in Westminster criticising President Trump for the unilateral imposition of a tariff and then doing so themselves simply in the name of climate by another name.
Absolutely right. Well, we're going to turn to the floor. So, I saw the first hand go up is Jonathan Isaby over there. We'll be able to get a microphone to Jonathan. There we are.
Thank you. Jonathan Isaby from the Growth Commission. Indeed, we have two Growth Commissions in the room, Shankar Singham and Barbara Berry-Whitman. It won't surprise you to learn that the Growth Commission is very critical of a lot of the things the current government is pursuing, whether it be hiking corporate taxes, getting rid of the non-dom regime, the net zero agenda and so on, all of which lamentably are things which basically the previous government was doing and the current government is merely putting its foot on the gas a bit faster. It makes it all more extraordinary that last August, the Prime Minister in his, I was going to say his honeymoon, if he did have one, it was very short, but I think possibly in August he was still in it. He said that growth, and by which I mean wealth creation, his words, was, quote, the number one priority of this government. Is that not quite a useful test against which we ought to be measuring everything the government does, and indeed by which we ought to be judging you and the opposition as it puts its policy proposals together over the coming months and years as to whether the proposals will or will not promote growth?
Yeah, that is an excellent point, and applaud the work done by the Growth Commission. It's often a reference source for me. I was looking only this morning at the commentary you've provided on the government's industrial strategy, and I think pretty spot on. Look, one doesn't seek to find fault for its own sake. A lot of that strategy is continuity of strategies that we had in government, but there are some really big missed opportunities, particularly as it relates to growth. One is the very timorous action that they're taking on energy that is clustered around those very biggest businesses that tend to hang around government. Another is the long-awaited opportunity for this government to live to what it said about growth and to drop, shelve or mitigate the Employment Rights Bill. It's impossible to reconcile that bill, and no one, to my knowledge, has even tried in this government with the idea of growth. If you want growth, you need the private sector to expand, you need people off welfare into work. You do not pass 300 pages, 120,000 words of chilling red tape. Not a single business supports it. Even the normally timorous business groups that hang around Whitehall, don't normally like to criticise government, have been, for them, fairly critical of it. So it would be a really good acid test. If the government was serious about growth, that would be one of the very first things, assuming that they won't reverse some of the fiscal changes that are anti-growth. One of the very first things that they could do it tomorrow. It's still going through the Lords. They could kick it for touch. They could go back and consult, or even better, they could revert to what previous socialist governments have done and say we're not going to revisit this careful balance between rights and responsibilities.
Absolutely right. Sir Bill Cash, just to...
Thank you very much for an extremely intelligent, extremely interesting exchange. It's been a great pleasure. I would just like to ask a question about the reform programme and also how you're going to go about it. And I'm not expecting to have a great analysis, but we do have an unwritten constitution. Sovereignty lies at the heart of it, and remember Section 38 and all that stuff from the Withdrawal Agreement Act. But in order to achieve it, the law has to be on the principle of legality, clear and unambiguous, and then the Supreme Court will actually support an enactment, despite the fact that many people think that most of the judges are terrible lefties. Having said that, the fact is that they will apply that principle, so we need to understand that we've got to look very carefully at the manner in which, for example, Parliamentary Council draft statutes, the civil service in the manner in which they've taken such incredible control over the legislative programme, and also to make quite sure that when the legislation for a revocation or repeal is made, the law is clear and unambiguous. And that is quite a challenge, but do not agree that that is at the heart of what we have to do if we're going to get, as with our Stand Up for Sovereignty campaign, which is going at the moment, an objective which is really important.
Thank you, Bill.
Yes, I do. And you were a great parliamentarian, Bill, that we miss. And there are others. Jacob Rees-Mogg, another. And I don't want to get too much into a hobby horse of mine, but Parliament and individual politicians carry a great weight of responsibility. And we don't give ourselves agency by criticising civil servants. I generally don't do that. I criticise the system in which they operate. And the same is true to a degree of the courts, is that if we make good legislation, if we are thoughtful, if we use the mechanisms of Parliament to properly hold government to account, and use that in a way to test and expose weaknesses at the point when legislation is made, if we use the greater powers of Parliament to scrutinise, which is sometimes about the calibre of people that we have in Parliament, their independence of thought and mind, rather than their adherence to an overmighty executive, then we will get better laws. And laws are ultimately upstream of the interpretive layer in the courts, in tribunals, and in our civil service. Fewer, bigger, better. Don't constantly try and rush through poor legislation, which then has to be remedied or modified to be successful in the immediate previous term, which is what we see a great deal of. And Parliament rationing its most scarce resource, which is time to legislate. I don't say this to diminish or for amusement, but last Thursday, you think about the great issues that we face in society. We have to find a way of providing the world's best quality healthcare to make our citizens' lives longer and better quality. We do have to find an answer to social care. We need to find a proper, sustainable answer to welfare reform. We're competing with all of these other states that are above us from our 29th position in global competitiveness. But last Thursday, Parliament spent almost all of its time debating incontinence and water safety from drowning. Now, I say, don't misquote me. I don't mean those are very debilitating conditions, but there are lots of better ways, I think, that we could be using parliamentary time, parliamentary scrutiny. The level of, I've written about this relatively recently on Conservative Home, but the level of scrutiny of financial budget decisions is desultory.
Yeah.
I mean, I expected as a finance director of 12 years us to spend a day or two discussing each department's budget. In fact, we spent a day or two discussing in very abstract level the entirety of the £1.4 trillion that government spends, let alone the other 1.3 trillion that's off their balance sheet entirely. Very little scrutiny. And in an overmighty executive system, whichever party is in control, that is not a good way to run our country. It's not a good way to make good decisions, whether you're running a think tank, whether you're running a business, or whether you're running the great United Kingdom.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to Steve Baker in the middle, then I'll take a couple of questions in group, and then oh, Francisca. Sorry. This middle here.
Thank you very much. Andrew, I've absolutely no doubt, if I may say so, that you'd be a truly outstanding business secretary, but it's going to be at least 4 years before you get to have a go. What do you think is going to be the context at the next general election, and what's going to be the true scale of the problems that hopefully you have to confront?
If we are successful in our job as opposition, the context, to me, will be the economy. And it will be a greater realisation by the British people of the gap between where we are and where we could be. So I started by talking deliberately about an optimistic vision for our country. I don't want to spend 3 years finding fault and talking our country down. But if we can paint that successful positive vision, and we can point to examples around the world of other countries that are doing particular things in a way that's either better or that we can emulate and aspire to, then we can also permission ourselves to give the honest, unvarnished truth about where we are. Hold up a mirror as to what is wonderful in our society and working, but what is not wonderful and is not working. And if we can frame the next election around that, a positive vision of where we could be, but a slightly critical vision of where this government and perhaps some of its predecessors have led us to, then we have a chance. Only a chance. In democracy, people have choices, and we have to outrun our past, our legacy, some of the things that we didn't achieve that we would have liked to achieve. And the way we do that, I think, is a credible set of plans. No more trust me, because I think 4 years is too short a period of time to simply assert things. But I think if we can do show me, if we can actually lay out clear plans in selected areas, then we've got a decent chance. And I don't see any other party, I don't criticise other parties, we've got to be the best version of ourselves and control what we can control, but I actually don't see other parties, even some of those parties that are doing better in the polls today, doing the hard yards of that. So you can do the short-term dopamine sugar rush, unless you've got the really credible 10-point plans. I think when it actually comes to who they trust to run this country, we've got a decent shot at it. Not complacent, it's not going to be easy.
Fantastic. Tony Diver in the white shirt. Francesco, just at the front there.
Thank you, Andrew. Tony Diver from The Telegraph. Can I ask a bit more about your plans for a world-beating offer to wealth creators? You said you've only just started work on that, but can I ask what options you might be looking at? Are we looking at repealing Labour's reforms on non-DOMs? And would you consider a kind of cash for visas scheme such as the one that Donald Trump and Nigel Farage have both suggested?
Love your work, Tony. I don't want to do what I said I wouldn't do, which is we want to take a thoughtful and measured and credible approach. So the two elements that anybody looking at this issue would explore is one, reversing Rachel's attack on global wealth. Right? There's proper equities in how you frame this decision, but the idea and the particular jeopardy that is pushing people away who've been here for a significant period of time and would like to remain here is the jeopardy to taxing, particularly inheritance tax, where the UK rate is out of kilter with other global jurisdictions, is taxing family wealth that may have been created in many preceding generations, but all of a sudden, because of the change that she made, nothing that we did, is potentially attackable by the UK Treasury. Sorry, do you understand what I mean by that, right? So she specifically said that after a certain period of time, your entire global wealth may never have touched the UK at all, is in jeopardy. That's point one. Point two, the UK does not currently have an investment visa at all. So there's no route to come and get a visa to this country simply by virtue of your desire to invest in productive or risk-taking assets that contribute to the economy. So there's two lenses there. One is firmly within the definitions of tax realm. The other is about having a competitive international visa offering, such as many other countries offer. We're not going. I mean, in my view, you do not compete as the wonderful United Kingdom simply on the basis of a lowest common denominator price. Right? We've got much more to offer than that. This capital city, is simultaneously, which is very rare, a political, a cultural, an education, and a financial services and business capital. Many other countries, you get one of those. Here, we've got the full deal. This should be, when we change the mayoralty, this should be one of the best capital cities on the planet, as it always has been and should be once again. So you compete not just on price, as it were. We've got a lot more to offer than that.
Fantastic. Chap in the pale suit here, third row.
Hello, I'm Matthew Trimming, the chap in the pale suit. I'm also a constituency member of Andrew's constituency, and he does a great job. I also run a couple of small businesses in his constituency and recognise everything that he's said. One plea and then one question. The plea is there's a lot about people leaving the UK, either high net worths or, young people. There are a lot of people who grew up in the UK, have raised families in the UK, have families in the UK, and whilst they might wake up in the morning and think, that would be a nice option to go to Dubai or whatever, they won't. They're going to stay here. And a few more words on the people sort of not stuck here. Everybody chooses to be here, and that's the majority of the people trying to run small businesses in this country. So plea done. Question, your idea of having a Queen's speech or a King's speech with fewer things in it, I think back to the very good work that was done around the Deregulation Act. Baroness Neville-Rolfe was intimately involved in that back in the day. What scope is there for a new sort of deregulation effort in both the party's planning and then when you're in government?
Look, plea fully understood. You're absolutely right. I'm in danger of overweighting because it's an important topic right now. We want to get to a position of enduringly low taxes. And I could have talked, again, not fully my brief, but I could have talked about the real pain point of young people facing, in some cases, marginal taxes or withdrawal rates of 79% through a combination of childcare, high cost of living in London, and the student loans repayments. So, that's properly 1970s stuff, and that should be addressed as part of any system of tax reform that I know the Shadow Chancellor and others in government will all look at. In terms of, sorry, your second question? Deregulation. Yes. I think where things will evolve to, this is a bit conjecture, you asked the question, so I'll give you a straight answer, is something like a Great Reform Act or a Great Repeal Act that wraps in a number of impedances. So Fred raised with me, and you talk about red tape on business and it sounds abstract, right? And I will not be a business secretary who stands up at an election time or in a manifesto says, we will repeal red tape without detailed plans to do that, because that's just a trope. They've all done that, and they've all presided over more regulators. So you've got to actually surface the choices. We talked earlier about the unintended consequences of equalities legislation. Okay, not fully my gig, but it definitely impacts upon business, impacts upon many other aspects of society, even in the planning system. There are consequences from the Human Rights Act, the ECHR, and equalities in our planning framework. So as David Wolfson does the work of the corpus of legal systems, most, not all of which date back to that Blairite era, some we did, other rolls about, for example, the ability of ministers to direct regulators. Right? So it's pretty much known on record. I was the city minister responsible for all financial regulation. There were some really big issues about where risk appetite sat, and some of that was about not just the corpus of law, but the corpus of regulators, the people in it. And try as one might, as a minister, one was not able to change some of the people operating within the system, even when one felt that the way in which they were interpreting statutes was deleterious to the growth of our country. So a candidate would be just relitigating, and I don't want ministers to be making capricious decisions or decisions that are cavalier, but relitigating where accountability lies. That I think is an issue rather than all the calibre of the people.
Fantastic. So it has ticked past 10:15. I want to make this event as efficient as possible and allow you to return to your busy working days. I'm going to call time on it there. Okay. Andrew Griffith, Shadow Secretary of State for Business, thank you very much for coming. And everyone, please do enjoy a cup of coffee and